Hey everybody, how are you today? So today we're going to continue to talk about deviance. So remember, someone who is considered deviant is someone who is violating society's norms or accepted ways of behaving in a situation that have been passed on from, their parents, their friends, society, the media, school, one of those agents of socialization. And remember, we also talked about for an act to be considered deviant, someone has to catch you committing that crime. And also to be considered deviant, it's not just that you were caught, it's that obviously you're going to receive some kind of punishment, hence you did something bad. You're going to receive a negative sanction to try to encourage you to not do it again because it has harmed yourself, society, or others. And perhaps people will look down on you because you committed the crime or because you received that punishment. There is some type of stigma involved. And remember last time we also talked about how when it comes to deviant behavior, it really and truly is focused on the situation, the time, and the place. And remember, we talked about how in some situations it's okay to kill someone. If you are a police officer, if you're a soldier at war, but not if you're just going to go outside and decide to kill someone because they took the last pack of Hershey Kisses at Walmart and you really wanted those. I don't know, that was really random. But you see what I'm talking about. So the situation matters. Obviously, the place matters. In some countries, divorce is illegal, but obviously it is legal in the United States. But also the time matters. Once upon a time, if you got divorced in the United States, it was not illegal, but you were considered a deviant for doing so. So you would receive some kind of social stigma by society. But obviously in today's world, you would not. So time, place, situation all play a factor. Now, today we're going to get into the different theories to explain deviance. So I assigned earlier this week that graphic organizer worksheet that goes along with chapter 7 section 2, where you're reading about the different theories that try to help explain why do people perform deviant acts. And remember, each different sociological theory has their own view on this. So we're going to start off with kind of looking at things from the functionalist perspective. Remember, the functionalist perspective looks at the glass half full. Sociologists who adhere to it just assume that things happen for a reason. They're all part of a natural structure and outgrowth of our society. Remember that functionalists in general, they said that deviance isn't in fact even a bad thing. Remember we talked last time about how they said when someone is deviant, it helps truly clarify the norms, because if one kid gets in trouble, it shows everybody else not to do it. It unifies the group because people realize these are values that they care about that should be reinforced to protect others. You want to make sure people in your society are not getting raped or murdered or theft is occurring. Minor acts of deviance, especially in terms of acting out, in terms of rebellion or protests, are a good thing. They're a way to release some social tension, and they help highlight problems which are wrong with the society that need to be changed. And of course, since people are deviant, it does create jobs in our society. But the main real functionalist perspective as far as why deviance occurs, and the thought is that it's a natural occurring factor in our society, that some people are going to conform to what is expected to them and do what they're supposed to do, but other people are not going to conform. And there's different modes of adaptation, meaning ways that they are going to respond to the problem, the situation. And the real creator behind this is a man by the name of Robert Merton. I was just going to post a video clip today about Merton, but all the ones I found were really boring. I don't remember the one I showed last year. So instead, I did post a crash course. It's optional to watch. It provides you some extra additional information about Robert Merton and strain theory. But basically, in strain theory, he really talks about how, many people are going to conform to the norm. They're going to do what is expected to them. But other people are not, and they're going to find other ways to cope with that norm and with society's expectations, and there's going to be different paths or adaptations to doing so. And so we're going to go through each of those. So if you're filling out your graphic organizer worksheet, Robert Merton would be the guy's name to know, and this is, of course, the functionalist perspective when we're talking about how deviance is a natural outgrowth of the values, norms, and structure of our society. And if we're focusing on how one of the big focuses in America is, of course, on wealth. America, whether we like to admit it or not, I'd like to say that we're all about equality and freedom. Yeah, we are, especially compared to many other countries, but we're still definitely focused on beauty. I hope you realized that when we read the Nasarima article earlier this year. But we're also very focused on wealth. And so many people say, okay, I would obviously like to have money, so I'm going to try to get an education and I'm going to try to get a good job. And whatever that job might entail. Does it entail going to college? Does it entail going to a school to learn a vocation? Does it involve farming? Does it involve some kind of family business? Whatever it may be. But your goal, obviously, is to live a prosperous life, having some expendable wealth to have fun. And so the vast majority of Americans are going to make their money through desirable means. They're going to try to study hard, go to school, learn a trade, learn a skill, work hard, save their money. Okay? But what happens if you work hard and you still don't make any money? What happens if tragedy befalls your family? What happens if you were born into poverty? If you face all these difficult life circumstances because your parents are out of work because of COVID-19, because you worked at Culver's. Tyler, I'm thinking of you at the moment. Culver's is shut down only for a week, or is it like longer? I don't know. I was thinking about that. I really want cheese curds at the moment. I'm hungry. But I don't know if anybody else works Culver's. That was just kind of my thoughts. But, if people are unemployed, if they're out of a job, that's obviously going to be affecting them. So there could be a possible time in people's lives when they are faced with a term called anome, which was really first discussed by Emile Durkheim. Remember, he was the French sociologist, and I should say social scientist, really, early on, who was doing those experiments on suicide and talked about how important it is. You can't just collect observations by people, you need to actually do experiments and collect data. And, he talked about how what happens when people can't, fulfill society's norms? What happens when people can't meet those goals, when they experience those mental health issues, that sense of depression, the sense that they have low self-esteem, they feel like they can't make it, they're not good enough, they're overwhelmed. What happens when the norms of society really are unclear and people don't know how to move forward to meet those goals and expectations? They don't seem to apply to people as normal. There's kind of this normlessness, so to speak. And so this is this anome. And he talked about it really in terms of suicide and how people, obviously felt like they couldn't, deliver what was expected of them. They can't fulfill, the expectations of their family and society. And unfortunately, with lack of mental health at that point in time and information about depression, we saw, high suicide rates throughout France. And that's what he was documenting in his study. But Merton is just thinking about, okay, what happens if people can't make money, if they can't live this prosperous life? What happens then? How do they adapt? How do they deal with that situation that they can't meet society's norms? So he talked about how when it came to an expectation of society or a norm, which in this case, a norm is obviously to have some wealth, right? People would like a car, they'd like a job, they'd like to go on vacation. Maybe they'd like designer clothes. Maybe they want a lot of land. Maybe they want a four-wheeler to go run around and play with. Maybe they want to, I don't know, get a boat. Whatever it is, that is personally on your list of things in terms of material possessions that you would like. What happens if you can't meet those goals? So the chart on page 165 in your book is fantastic, and it really kind of goes through each of these modes of adaptation, and that's what you're going to be filling out in the last column of your graphic organizer. I would kind of sum that up to try to help you understand it. But basically, the vast majority of Americans and of people in any society, they accept the norm, the goal, and they attempt to achieve it, meaning through appropriate channels. They get an education, they get a job, they work hard, they save their money. Maybe they're rich, maybe they're poor, but they try their best. But there's other people out there who say, forget this. I went to school, I work hard, I save my money, and I'm not getting anywhere. And so these people are what we consider to be the innovators. They are basically rejecting society's norms, and they're going to find illegal ways to try to make extra money in terms of criminal behavior. So are they going to steal? Are a lot of things going to fall off of a truck? I don't know if you've ever heard that expression before, but growing up in the Chicago suburbs, And in the Chicago area, yes, it's definitely a term that was part of my vocabulary that, yeah, so and so just got all this stuff. It just fell off a truck. No, stuff doesn't really fall off of a truck. It's not like your Amazon packages are all over the road unless there's a terrible crash. Um, but in reality, yeah, people steal stuff. They claim that it fell off of a truck. I don't know why it wasn't there upon delivery. And then people get free stuff and they sell it on eBay or, give it to friends, family, whatever. But people find ways to innovate to make money. Are they selling drugs? Are they selling property? Are they stealing? Are they burglars? Car theft? Whatever it may be. But they are finding a way since they're rejecting the legitimate way of making money. And they might have a side job, a legitimate business, but they're also going to find ways to sell other products to make money, to scam the system. Are they some kind of grifters, so to speak? Are they running some kind of scam? And you have to always kind of pay attention to that. People will always be out there scamming. And they'll try to sell you stuff to events that are free or collect your information. Now, we've also got people who are basically what we consider the ritualist group. And these people, for the most part, they are kind of perhaps afraid. They are rejecting the goal of being super rich. They are simply, accepting the norm as it is. So the norm is that you're supposed to go to school, graduate, perhaps you go to college, perhaps you don't. And then, of course, you get a job and you go to work. And that's your life, right? It sounds kind of depressing when you put it like that, but it's true. So they accept the norm. That's what you're supposed to do. You get up, you go to work, you make money, but they're not really focused on I always have to take on extra responsibility, or I have to work a second shift, or a side job, or I have to try to get promoted, or I have to become a manager. I have to do whatever it is to make more money. They're going to accept the status quo. And it could be that they're accepting the status quo because they are rejecting wealth, because they say that money's not the source of all true happiness, because they might say that, life is just, one part of the eternal journey, that it's not going to, it's not going to be what gets you into heaven. It's not about how much money you have, that money doesn't really mean that you're successful. It doesn't really mean that you're happy as long as you have all your loved ones. That time is money, that perhaps you'd rather spend time with your family and friends rather than get a second job. Maybe you don't need all those fancy toys in terms of four-wheelers and fancy trucks and cars and boats and, I don't know, fancy vacations or, designer purses, watches, whatever it might be. So you, in a sense, reject the cultural goal. It could be the example they gave you in the book was someone who would not go for promotion because they're afraid of failure. They're simply going to continue on in terms of those rituals. And there could be kind of, several different reasonings behind that. It could be a fear factor. It could be religiously motivated, value motivated, that they just, they're going to continue with the rituals of life, the norms of life, which is you go to work, you work hard. They're not so focused on the wealth. Okay. So the innovators desperately want the wealth, but they don't want to go to work. The ritualists, they don't really care so much about the wealth, but they are going to go to work. Okay, kind of the opposite there. Okay, then when it comes to, the retreatists here, they're interesting. They reject the cultural goals and they reject the norms. So they could give a heck about getting super rich, but they also don't want to work. So they don't really care if they're super rich. They don't really care if they go to work. They don't care who they make mad. They don't care if they follow, into society's footsteps. So this could be a life that somebody, dedicates to the church, to the priesthood, to mission work, to helping others, to being a social worker. But it could also be not that they're still helping each other and helping society. It could be that they're really and truly struggling, where they're just completely rejecting all work and, not fitting in with society's groove. And they say, I don't want to be a cog in the machine. I don't want to listen to the man. I don't want to do the job. I don't care about making the money. I just want to get by. I want to live on my own. So perhaps they go off and live in the woods. Perhaps they live a very isolated lifestyle. Perhaps they, reject technology and such, like the Amish. Or it could be that they go down a very difficult life path and, they become a hobo. They're a bum. They're homeless. They're on drugs. So kind of to give you more of the positive end to the negative end, but they're definitely someone who is not focused on wealth, and they're not focused on the traditional life path of going to work, of following society's norms, of anything like that. And last but not least, we've got the rebellious group. And the rebellious group, they're, not only rejecting the cultural goal of, trying to get rich, but they're also rejecting the norm that they should go to work and listen to their boss, and this is the status quo. They're trying to create new rules about how our society should be created. They're the revolutionaries out there. They're trying to stir up rebellion. They're trying to improve things. So, for example, until we had the women's liberation movement of the 1960s, it was still really taboo for women to go to work. Many women who did work were paid less than men, which is ridiculous. But there was no sense of equality. So if a woman was a teacher and a man was a teacher, he could potentially be paid more because it was considered he had to take care of his family. And so somebody who would be in the rebellious group, they're like, I'm not focused on wealth. I'm not really trying to become an administrator, become a principal or anything like that. Maybe, they're not trying to get super rich, but at the same point, they're like, yeah, I want a job, but I don't want a job in this system. I don't want to be another cog in the wheel. I don't want to be a teacher who gets paid half as much, who gets treated in this way. I want to get treated with respect and be treated equally and have equal wealth opportunities as, my colleagues. So they're trying to bring about the change, so to speak. So overall, most people are going to conform. But you are going to have people who fall into the innovation, the ritualist, the retreatist, the rebellion categories. Now, let's move on to the next theory of deviance. So that's kind of the functionalist perspective, right? That most people conform, they do what they're supposed to do, they meet society's norms, but there are people who, do not conform to society's norms, that they do experience this anomie, and, they perhaps, don't want to work hard. And so they find illegal ways to perhaps make money as they innovate, or they're not focused on the wealth, but they do, fulfill society's norms in terms of rituals, and they work. There's other people who totally retreat from trying to focus on wealth or work and live a life on their own more, following their own rules. And then there's people in the rebellion group who are actually trying to change the rules as they stand. Perhaps they don't want to focus on wealth or work in that type of environment. But functionalists basically say that deviance is normal, it's natural, it's healthy in a way, and it's always going to exist. And then on the conflict theory, which I think is the last box on your worksheet, the conflict theory or the conflict perspective, that's on page 165 in your book. It's also on the page with the chart. This is basically the theory that, deviance is going to happen in our society because you have inequality, right? You've got gender inequality, you've got race inequality, you've got wealth inequality. And as long as there's always in one group that has more power compared to the other, and there's going to be a struggle for power, for wealth, and inequality exists, you're going to see deviance. Because you're going to see one group that is going to fight against the system that's going to try to raise themselves up and get more money and more power. And they're going to be tired of, feeling worthless and powerless. And they're going to try to fight the system, so to speak. Richard Keeney is the one in particular who really talks about this and talks about how, it's very difficult, to change the system because the people who are in power want to maintain power. So if you look at our American society, for example, it is a society that for the past 200 years that the United States has been around, wealthy white men have been in charge. And they basically are the ones who are in charge. They're well educated. They've written a lot of books. They've talked a lot about crime. And they say, who are the most people committing crimes? They claim, at least, that most of the crimes are committed by minority groups. By the poor, and that's who they basically, since they're the ones in power, they tell the police officers that's who you need to watch, that's who you need to investigate, that's who you need to arrest. And so, of course, those crimes are processed, those people are arrested, and the prisons are full. So that's not to say that those crimes aren't happening. No, by no means whatsoever. But a lot of the times, police officers don't really pay attention to white-collar crimes. The crimes that are being committed in terms of power grabs and money, transfers that are happening by the wealthy. So the rich, educated white men who are in power often commit their own crimes. It's just perhaps not petty theft or, murder. It's more so that they are committing high-powered crimes in terms of shady business deals, to perhaps make money or illegally transfer goods or pay their, employees low wages, working in sweatshop conditions. And they've done that for many, many years. Excuse me, guys. So, yeah, basically, what the conflict theorists are getting at is that because the system itself is unequal, inequality exists, and deviance will continue to exist as long as there is inequality, because there will always be this fight for power. And of course, the people who are in power are labeling certain groups as deviant when perhaps that label is incorrect. Perhaps the people in power are also deviant in their own right, but they're simply not getting labeled for it and punished for their actions the way that they should be. Now, the last grouping to move into is the social interactionist. So remember, those symbolic interactionists, those social interactionists, they're not so interested on whether deviance should occur or shouldn't occur, or whether it's natural or unnatural. Because the functionalists say it's natural. The conflict perspective also basically says it's natural and basically inevitable. And I guess the functionalists in this case actually do as well. But the symbolic interactionists aren't, as focused perhaps on just understanding why deviance occurs the way the functionalist and the conflict perspective is. They're really interested in the relationships, the patterns, what made somebody be deviant to begin with, and then once they are deviant, how does that label kind of really impact them? So the first one I want to talk about in terms of symbolic interactionism is the control theory. And the control theory, I think, is like one of the most interesting theories out there, because control theorists basically say most people conform, okay? Which isn't really anything new. We've already said that 90% of the people, 90% of the time, in terms of that 90-90 rule, do what they're supposed to do. And so the control theorists say, most people conform, they follow the society's norms, they do what they're supposed to do, and they go on to say, in control theory, that people basically are more likely to follow the social controls that society has created and follow the norms, the more integrated they are with the community. And if they're not integrated, that's when they're deviant. So they're really focused on what leads to deviant behavior. And they would basically say that, you will be deviant if you're not integrated with your community. And they go on to say that there's 4 real things that make someone integrated with the community. And they say, first off, if you have close attachments in the community to like parents, teachers, youth group leaders, coaches, friends, you're less likely to be deviant because you have like a sense of camaraderie, friendship, morals, relationships with other people who have similar values as your own. And second, if you really believe in that society's moral code, that, there's certain things you should do and how you should behave, and there's certain things which are right, and there's certain things which are wrong. Next off, if you basically adhere to your society's values, meaning that you believe it's important to help clean up the road or to help the homeless or get a good education, anything like that, if you're willing to, follow the society's values, etc., get an education, get a job, work hard, give back to the community, in toy drives and such at Christmas, you're less likely to be deviant because you're involved. And last but not least, if you're busy with your family, with your friends, giving back, volunteering, doing different activities, you don't simply have time to be deviant. You just don't. I mean, when the heck do you have time to screw around? You're tired, basically, by the end of the day, because perhaps you have some fun in your life, but at the same time, you're so involved. And so these control theorists really say that the more involved someone is doing these 4 things, the less likely, so the more involved they are, the more integrated, they're basically following society's social control, hence why it's called control theory, the less likely they are to be deviant because they are so integrated into society. And they also, interestingly enough, go on and they talk about self-control. And a lot of them say that, if you are taught self-control as a child, that's going to play out basically as an adult, meaning that, if your parents told you, you know, you don't start eating till everyone is seated, or you can't open your presents on Christmas morning until everybody's awake and around the tree, whatever it is. And if they're going to then provide you with positive and negative sanctions, enforcing certain behavior and teaching you about social control, if you've been taught that, you're less likely to be deviant because your parents have reinforced for you there's certain ways for you to behave in situations. And if you don't behave that way, you should feel bad for it. Okay? Now, the next theory, okay, under symbolic interactionism, is one called the cultural transmission theory. And basically, in this one, it's really interesting as well. They basically say that deviant behavior is learned, okay? And at the heart of this cultural transmission theory is this concept called differential association. And I kind of use the two terms interchangeably, so don't worry, if you see either term. But basically, it's the idea that if you spend your time, with deviant people, they're going to teach you deviant things. If you spend your time with non-deviant people who follow society's social controls, who do the norms, who are integrated, you're less likely to do deviant things because, they're an agent of socialization. So your parents, remember we said, are the most important agent of socialization. If your parents are honest people, they've taught you stealing is wrong. However, if you've learned, that stuff fell off the truck, they're not going to miss it, Walmart's a big company. And you might say, what? That's crazy. I mean, I don't know. I just found out my cousin's getting divorced, and she was telling us this story about how she was married to that guy for 5 years, and we always thought he was a psycho. And she never talked to us basically for 5 years. But she's getting divorced, and she was telling us how literally they would steal from Walmart all the time. Yeah, she told us this whole story about how they would purposely grocery shop on a family on Sundays when Walmart was busy, and then they would hide extra things in the bottom of the cart, and then the kids would sit in the cart basically on the stuff. Yeah, messed up, I know. And I was like, that's really wrong. And I was like, weren't you worried of getting caught? And her response was, well, he always said that if they did get caught, they would just blame it on the kids and say, oh, those dang kids, I threw that and I didn't see it, and then just play the, oh, I'm really sorry card. And it's not like they're poor. It's not like they didn't have the money. They're not rich by any means, but they're average middle class family. But he just liked the thrill of shoplifting and wanted to see if he could get away with it. And he definitely bought into this mentality that I'm allowed to steal because Walmart is so wealthy. And he basically was never taking any responsibility for his actions. And so if he was ever accused of it, he wasn't taking the blame. He was basically blaming it on the kids. And he was also saying it was basically a victimless crime because no one's getting hurt in his mind. And he was already saying, well, Walmart deserved it, trying to justify his actions, saying that they were wealthy. And I don't know much about this guy's childhood, but perhaps he did come from a family where deviant behavior was allowed. That's all I can possibly imagine. But that's what cultural transmission theory and differential association really says, is that the more contact you have and the more people that participate in deviant behavior, that becomes normal to you compared to, I kind of worry about his kids now. His kids are, 9 and 5. And I'm just wondering what the lasting impact will be on them. How will they behave? So far, they're not the best behaved kids from what I've seen. But it's really an interesting kind of thing to see why people do what they do. That's kind of one explanation there. Last one to talk about in terms of symbolic interaction is called labeling theory. And labeling theory isn't really interested so much on why people conform the way that control theory is, or why people are deviant the way that cultural transmission theory is. They're focused on, okay, well, what happens once you do get labeled as a deviant? And I provided some Seinfeld clips for you guys because I think they're funny. I normally watch a whole Seinfeld episode and discuss it because Kramer and George and that whole crew can be slightly inappropriate at times. But for the most part, they are crazy and they do things, and should they be labeled as deviant or not? Well, remember, to be labeled as deviant, it's all about the time, the place, the situation. How many times did you really do it? That's really all part of it. Now, technically, in labeling theory, and what they're going to say is that, remember, to be labeled as deviant, someone has to be caught doing whatever they were doing, okay? And they had to receive some kind of negative sanction for it, some kind of punishment, and some kind of stigma. So if someone is, committing primary deviance, and it looks like the slide is a little goofy, I'll fix this slide and kind of repost it for you guys. But for number 1 there, it says primary deviance nonconformity, which is undetected, meaning that someone occasionally violates society's norms. They're occasionally committing deviant acts, but they're not really being punished for it because nobody knew. And in the Seinfeld clip I provided, George Costanza in the clip is sleeping under his desk at work because he wants to take a nap. But the thing is, he never gets caught. And if you don't ever really get caught, and if you don't ever really get punished for it, is it really a deviant act to begin with? And he's not really being labeled as a true deviant, as a troublemaker. Compared to someone who commits deviance on a regular basis, it becomes a lifestyle for them. They get caught doing it, they get punished, and they receive that label of deviance. It becomes a hardship for them. They get discriminated against. It becomes difficult to get a job, especially if they are someone who was a felon. And they're going to, then perhaps go through what we consider a self-fulfilling prophecy, where everybody looks at them as a deviant, thinks that they're going to commit illegal acts, so then they can't get a job anywhere, they can't make any money, and so then they go back in terms of strain theory, and then they perhaps basically turn back to perhaps criminal behavior and innovation because they can't make money through legal means. So secondary deviance is someone who is labeled as deviant. They have a hard time accepting it. They eventually accept that label, and then perhaps they even fulfill that label as a deviant because that society sees them, so they might as well just go along with it. It's a type of learned helplessness in a way. So that wraps up section 2, guys. And that's about it for now. Have a great day.